So we'll go ahead and get informally started here. Oh, good. Another member. Okay, one more. Representative Brockway, you have a interesting resolution here. Would you like to tell the committee about it?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity. Do I need to push a button, or are we good?
You're
okay. Appreciate the opportunity to come present this resolution before you. House Resolution 106, working off of LC 1080112. And it's a very long resolution. I won't bore you with the line-by-line description. Essentially, what many of these pages are doing are just laying the groundwork for you for understanding that up until a certain point in the United States, the posture of Congress and of the federal government was that when a new state was created, that the federal lands that were in that state, in that territory, that once they became a state, they would be conveyed to that state. And at some point in time, that posture changed. And I would like to point you to lines 103 through 109, and it describes that in 1976, the Federal Land Policy Management Act was passed. And while that's done a lot of good things, unfortunately for some of these states that I'll explain in a moment, it changed the posture of the federal government to say, we won't convey the federal lands unless there is a particular federal interest. And this is not particularly an issue for us here in Georgia, but I gave a map to the committee, and I think if you look, these items in dark gray here out in the western states, you see that some states, particularly like Utah and Nevada, almost all federal land. And that presents a lot of problems for these states. Reduces their taxable land, reduces their tax base. It presents real problems for ranching and cattle herding is a big industry out in the West. And so their citizens are forced to deal with the federal government, and these states are all saying, listen, Congress for a couple hundred years in our country would convey these lands to the states to allow the states to manage these lands as they see fit. And this has become a hardship for their citizens. So the idea for this resolution came, I met at a conference a senator named Ken Ivory from Utah. And he is kind of at the forefront of leading these states to try to work with Congress to come to a resolution of how these lands can be conveyed back to the states in a practical and sensible way. And so he was asking other states around the country to pass a resolution like this, so more or less lending our support, an urging resolution that Congress should adopt this. South Carolina has done it, which is where I copied this language from. And as I was talking with Chairman Dollar about this, he raised a great question. What kind of federal land are we talking about? And if you look on the last page of the bill, beginning in about page 190, you will see that this excludes things like national parks and designated wilderness. So we're not talking about, for example, conveying Yellowstone National Park over to the state of Wyoming, for example. That would be, we as a nation would consider that a national treasure. So it does exclude those types of things, and it's really talking about these lands where cattlemen currently graze and hunters hunt and fishermen fish, conveying those sorts of things, and that they're better managed at the state level than at the federal level. And that essentially is the resolution, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, sir. Really? Oh, I'm sorry. It's House Resolution 106. I'm sorry. Oops. I'm sorry. No, that's not me. Yeah, the right. So you can see the map. This is what. Okay. I mean that essentially that's the issue here. It's more or less asking the state of Georgia to join with other states and urge Congress to deal with these dark shaded areas here that are federal lands. It's not particularly an issue for us. We've got a small number of federal lands like the Chattahoochee National Forest and the Okefenokee Swamp. I don't think that we want those conveyed to the state. But these areas where where grazing takes place and things like that.
And what is the threshold, or what are the qualifiers for what constitutes, a usable?
Yeah, I think.
Park or
I mean,
something like that?
like mentioned here in the resolution, which you don't have, but
Yeah.
it says it specifically. Yes.
Mhm.
It specifically excludes national parks, designated wilderness, and national heritage sites. So Congress has designated some of those areas as those types of things, but
Yeah.
there is a lot of other federal land that the feds are currently allowing cattlemen to use for grazing purposes. For example,
had a little issue out in Nevada.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that gentleman. Well, I'll just, for the record, I think he's crazy, but that's the kind of situation you're dealing with here, where you've got people currently using the federal land, and the federal government is managing that, and these states are saying, so the federal government gets the revenue, for example, of those grazing fees and so forth, and that's something that in our state would be come into our state coffers, and in these states it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And it presents a hardship for them, makes it harder, impacts their budget, and presents a hardship for their citizens. So, I guess if you want, Mr. Chairman, I'll let you. If you want, I can point you to the lines in the bill that I referenced earlier.
Yeah, really helpful.
Now that you all have a copy, lines 103 through 109 really identify when officially Congress's views on conveying federal lands to the states changed with the passage of that act, and it changed the disposition so that they can only convey lands that were deemed to be in the federal interest. So it's not in the state's interest. They're not examining, well, what's good for the state of Utah or the state of Nevada. It's what's in the best interest of the federal government, and that, as you know, we are a collection of states in this country, not first, not a federal government. Then, of course, at the end, lines 190 through 193 tell you which sorts of lands are excluded. We're not talking about taking Yellowstone National Park, for example, or the Grand Canyon, and conveying that over to the state so they can build condos on the edge of the Grand Canyon. We're talking those things would be set aside as areas of heritage sites.
National forests would be considered designated wilderness, is that right?
I think some of those would be, yeah. So essentially, Mr. Chairman, that is the resolution, and I would appreciate a favorable vote from this committee, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions that you may have, sir.
Well, we're not really in a posture where we can vote right now. We don't have a quorum.
Okay.
This is just off the top of my head. Do you have, and there's no reason you should know this, but do you know what the budget is for the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management?
I don't. No, I don't.
Because, I mean, it's pretty substantial. I know that, because they're tasked with, monitoring a lot of this property.
Right.
All right. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my Representative, my only question is, what impact would this have? I mean, on federal land. Don't get me wrong. I heard we don't have Yellowstone Park in Georgia, so it's two parts. And also, if you can give me some example of some land that the reason this came about.
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. The reason this came about is frankly, I met and got to know a little bit a senator from Utah who is, in his state, is introducing legislation to try to get Congress to sit down at the table and negotiate with the state of Utah over some of these areas. The idea is not necessarily that this land would be given free to the states. Many of these states in this area have bills in there to talk about, let's sit down with Congress and let us work out a purchase plan, more or less, to purchase these lands from the federal government. Lands that make sense. Do it over time, not suddenly just convey millions of acres to these states and suddenly they're in charge of it and there's no federal oversight of these areas. Set up an orderly process where the states can purchase it, where they can afford to do that, and where it makes sense to do that. So that's kind of the impetus for it. The lands we're talking about, as I mentioned before, a lot of these are lands that the federal government allows, for example, cattle ranchers to graze on. That's a huge industry out west. So they're already being used more or less for commercial purposes. They're not, as we mentioned, not areas that we would consider historic or of great natural beauty that we would want to protect. So,
In Georgia, we're talking about.
Well, in Georgia, there's no move to do this, and we really, I think if you look at the map, there's not a lot of. We don't face this, and some of that has to do because we were here before the United States was around. So this land was already ours before it was never had to be conveyed to us. Then you've got the Chattahoochee National Forest. I don't think I think things are going fine up there. It's not placing any burden on us. I guess the Okefenokee Swamp is another area. It's not presenting any hardship for us, so there's really no move here in Georgia to try to do that. It's really just to kind of put us on record that we support our brothers and sisters in the West that are facing this kind of area, that we think Congress should sit down at the table and talk with them about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the questions.
Well, that's the only question I see. I think what we're going to try to do then, Representative, is we'll adjourn this meeting and we'll try to meet early next week,
Okay.
and I'll crack the whip on some of these members to get us here, and we'll get this out because it's an urging resolution.
Yeah.
And, we don't need to beat our heads against the wall over it too much.
Right.
But I want to help you get it moving on.
Great. Thanks,
All
sir.
right.
Appreciate that.
All right, and to the members that
How many do we need?
we need one more. We need one more.
I just got a text from one of our members that said we had a quorum, and I said no.
Well, we think we can get one more here. Go ahead. Yeah. Give her the 30-second version. We have vetted this thing quite effectively here, Representative.
Yes, House Resolution 106, and it's an urging resolution. Essentially, the map you see there, the gray areas that we're talking about, those are lands that are owned by the federal government. And up until a certain point in time in our history, when a new state would be created, the deal was the federal government, like say Kansas gets formed, the federal government gives Kansas the land. But at some point in time, that changed, and so these western states you can see Nevada is almost all federal land, and so there's a number of legislators out in the West who want to be able to sit down with Congress and work things out to convey these lands through either sale or other such means to get those lands under the control of their state rather than the federal government. And if you're seeing the resolution, we're not talking about Yellowstone National Park, we're not talking about the Grand Canyon, putting condos on the Grand Canyon or anything like that. We're talking about land that principally out west would be used for grazing. And right now the state does not have access to those funds because those fees that are being paid to do that are going to the federal government, and it sort of puts a hardship on those state governments. So I'll happy to answer a question you got. In a nutshell, that's what it is. And the resolution is long. It's got a lot of history showing the court cases and official statements by the Congress over the years, and then when that changed, then the federal government's posture changed on that position. So that's essentially it, and I'll happy to answer any questions you might have on it.
Two simple questions. There's two simple questions.
Sure.
One is, once will the land be gifted back from the federal government?
There are bills in many of these states to urge Congress to sit down with them and negotiate a sale.
Okay.
So it will be done in a way that makes sense, that doesn't bankrupt these states and doesn't give it away for free necessarily. So.
Perfect. And secondly, what is Congress' position on this? Do we have any language from
Yeah,
Congress?
in the middle of the resolution, I'll just let me find the line for you. Lines 103 through 109 talk about in 1976, Congress passed the Federal Land Policy Management Act.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it really changed, and it became not what's in the best interest of the state, it became what's in the best interest of the federal government. And so that criteria changed, and therefore you see all those lands stayed under federal control. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, it's an urging resolution. It's not
Yeah.
putting any burden on us.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to do pass.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you
Representative.
very much, Mr. Chairman and committee. I appreciate it.
Good luck
Appreciate your
down the
time.
line.
Thank you.
I am going to, while we have a quorum real quick, go ahead and adopt the rules. They should be in front of you. They're the same as last year's. I'll look over them, and whenever you guys are ready, we'll take a motion to adopt them.
Chair, entertain a motion.
Yes, this time.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Adopt the rules. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And we have one more measure that we're going to take up today. This is Resolution 281. Talked to Representative Williamson. He could not be here, so I told him I would handle this for him. It's a fairly simple measure here. It's just to kind of recognize our Turkish friends and encourage a Georgian-Turkish Friendship Task Force, which I think would deal with trade and other such measures. It also, in here, it recognizes an event they're having for us, actually. I believe it's February 25th, so I kind of wanted to get this done before that date. If the committee has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. But again, this is just a resolution, fairly simple measure.
Record. I just want to go on record publicly supporting this measure.
Well, you are one of the signers, Representative Waits. So duly noted.
You want to go on record?
Duly noted, and I was going to actually recognize you for a motion.
Sir, I recommend we do pass.
Yes, I thought you might. And we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, members.
I have that event on my calendar too. Sounds like you might
Terrific.
get it. I thought I did. I don't. 25th.
Thank you. I want to formally welcome our new members. Thank you, guys. I hope we make this a fun committee, and we take up some interesting, as you can tell, we take up some kind of interesting issues the topics vary pretty greatly. And I think we can expect to get some more legislation this year than we did last year. So thank you guys for helping us get a quorum today, and I will let you know at our next meeting is.